The Titanic. It's the world's most infamous sinking. It's been the subject of numerous films. But there is one that almost everyone has forgotten. The Nazi version. It was one of the most expensive films ever made, reworking the story as a crude attack on Britain.
Producing films or battleships. From the Nazi perspective, they're both classified as weapons.
It's a strange story, but the story behind its production is stranger still.
The whole movie was Titanic itself. It turned out a movie disaster.
It ended in betrayal, disgrace, and death.
They were shooting at us in the river. It's like a fish in a barrel.
Now, using previously unseen footage and a secret diary, we can reveal a story that's been shrouded in secrecy for 70 years. The story of the Nazi Titanic. Berlin, August 1942. In police headquarters, a prisoner was found hanged in his cell. Most of the people incarcerated here were opponents of Hitler. But this man was a movie director of the Nazi regime, Herbert Selpin. Behind the name lies an extraordinary story, set during the height of the Second World War. 2 years earlier, in 1940, Europe was in flames. Countries had fallen like dominoes before the formidable Nazi military machine. 3 million soldiers, 2,500 tanks, and 3,000 warplanes. But Hitler's rise to power had been aided by another, equally potent weapon. Propaganda. Joseph Goebbels was Hitler's Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. His job was to keep the German population behind the war by promoting the Nazis and attacking their enemies. In the days before television, film was the world's most powerful communication medium and the only way to get the Nazi message to millions. Goebbels controlled every film made in Nazi Europe, and he also commissioned hundreds of propaganda movies for the Third Reich.
For the Nazis, film was an extremely important way of mobilizing audiences, of conveying ideas, and Hitler was fascinated by the power of film. Producing films or battleships. From the Nazi perspective, they're both classified as weapons. You couldn't just win the war through the military, and you couldn't win it just on propaganda.
As Europe burned, a script arrived on Goebbels' desk, outlining an extraordinary proposal, a feature film about the sinking of the Titanic. It might seem an unlikely choice of subject, but Goebbels believed the disaster could be turned into a propaganda weapon, a blockbuster film that would mount an attack on the British ruling class. The loss of the passenger liner in 1912 was the worst peacetime disaster at sea ever. More than 1,500 people lost their lives after the British-owned ship struck an iceberg and sank in icy seas. In 1940, the UK was Hitler's last undefeated enemy in Europe. Goebbels believed that the Titanic disaster could be used to mobilize the German people behind Nazi plans to invade Britain.
Goebbels expected the Titanic movie to become a very spectacular film with a lot of special effects, but he also, of course, expected that the film would have a clear message against the main enemy of Germany, Great Britain.
The Nazi version of the story blames the sinking on Britain's corrupt ruling elite. The Titanic's owner, Bruce Ismay, who is British but in the film speaks in German, is falsely portrayed as willing to risk the ship's safety to make a profit. This is the first time it is seen on British television.
Denn in diesem Augenblick, meine Damen und Herren, erleben Sie die Sensation, dass die Titanic 26,5 Seemeilen in der Stunde läuft. Das heißt, wir fahren Weltrekord.
Ismay ist doch ein Genie.
Und jetzt gehen wir zum Bunker hinauf und bestellen telegrafisch so viel Aktien, wie wir kriegen können.
Dann aber schnell, bevor die Sache in der Zeitung steht.
During the war years, Goebbels portrayed Britain as a sham democracy ruled by a group of plutocrats who were interested only in financial gain. What you see in the film Titanic is actually the ship being portrayed as kind of a microcosm of British society, in which you have this small group of plutocrats endangering the safety of the entire society in order to reap financial reward.
Goebbels had the project greenlit. The Nazi Titanic was to be a propaganda masterstroke, turning hearts and minds against the British. He had no idea that the project would spectacularly backfire on himself and the entire Nazi regime. August 1940. With most of Europe under his control, Hitler set his sights on his next target, Britain. He launched wave after wave of bombers across the English Channel, the aim to annihilate British air defenses before launching an all-out invasion and occupation. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels was busy stoking up anti-British feeling. His blockbuster film on the Titanic would blame the disaster on Britain's selfish ruling class. This is the opening sequence of the finished film.
Meine Herren Aktionäre, ich habe die außerordentliche Generalversammlung der White Star Linie einberufen, um Ihnen folgende Tatsachen zur Kenntnis zu bringen. Wir haben die Titanic gebaut, das größte Schiff der Welt.
It shows the ship's English owner, Bruce Ismay, chairing a shareholder meeting of the White Star Line, which owns the Titanic. It's followed by an entirely fictional scene in which Ismay tells his inner circle the Titanic's maiden voyage will make them all rich.
Nächste Woche tritt die Titanic ihre Jungfernfahrt über den großen Teich an. Und Sie, meine Herren, nehmen als meine Gäste daran teil. Sie werden auf dieser Fahrt eine sensationelle Überraschung erleben. Eine Überraschung, die unsere Aktien in ungeahnter Weise nach oben schnellen lassen wird.
The very opening of the film, where you're in a stockholders meeting, and yet you have the idea of a small group, even within that, of speculating in stock, hoping to make a killing.
Sir, Prost Ismay.
Ismay plans to break the record for an Atlantic crossing, driving up the company's share price, a goal he will pursue with total disregard for the safety of the ship.
Also, Captain Smith, wir verstehen uns. Im Falle der programmmäßigen Ankunft in New York zahle ich Ihnen $5.000. Und für jede Stunde, die wir früher eintreffen sollten, nochmals je $1.000. Also je höher die Geschwindigkeit Ihres Schiffes, umso höher Ihre Prämie.
Ismay, in the story, bribes the captain of the ship to set this world record and to show that how money rules this entire society.
I think that the propaganda message of the film is really, in some ways, quite simple and straightforward, and it demonstrates the degenerate qualities of British culture in some ways, and in particular, this idea that a society is really in collapse when it begins to value profit over people really is an important message that I think that Goebbels' propaganda ministry really hoped to put out there.
Starlinie zu 95.
The script twists the facts to push the Nazis' message. The message it conveys that Britain would be better ruled by the morally upright Nazi Party. In 1940, the Nazi Titanic was still at the planning stage. Goebbels approved a record budget of 4 million Reichmarks. That's over £100 million in real terms. He was a big fan of American movies and determined to prove that German film could outshine Hollywood.
It's a big movie, it's like a Hollywood movie, and I think this was the basic idea. We will produce our own Hollywood movies.
To direct the Nazi Titanic, Goebbels chose Herbert Zelpine. At the time, Zelpine was only 38, but he was an A-list director who had already made 2 propaganda films for Goebbels.
Zelpine was a young, dynamic director, very skillful, and he was specialized, one can say, upon movies with an action content. Goebbels liked his works, he liked his films. He displayed a very physical kind of cinema, extremely commercially successful movies.
Zelpine had an extraordinary collection of home movies, shown here for the first time. Here he is on location on the film Karl Peters that attacked British policy in Africa. Like all big Nazi films, the army were on hand to help out. With Zelpine at the helm and a record-breaking budget, the Nazi Titanic looked set for success. To Zelpine, it was the chance to create a masterpiece and win critical acclaim. To Goebbels, it was a dagger aimed at the heart of Britain. A remarkable document, which lay hidden in a German state archive since the war, reveals the extraordinary behind-the-scenes story for the very first time. This is the original production diary of the Nazi Titanic, kept by art director Fritz Maurischat. The diary reveals the scale of Zelpine's ambitions for the film. He asked for 87 shooting days, a lot even by today's action movie standards. He wanted 9 huge sets of the ship's interiors built in Berlin. He commissioned an unusually large 20-foot replica of the Titanic for a model shoot of the sinking. And for the exterior shoot, insisted on a full-sized ship.
Since the Titanic was considered as being an important war movie, Zelpine was able to succeed in fulfilling all his demands.
It showed the importance that the Nazis placed on propaganda, that they saw propaganda as such an important political and military weapon that they were willing to devote those kind of resources to it.
Nazi Titanic was to be Goebbels' biggest film yet, but he had been developing his strategy for some time, and his first target hadn't been the British. It had been the Jews. In April 1933, Goebbels launched a nationwide action to cleanse the German spirit, claiming the country's culture had become corrupt and decadent.
Right from the beginning, the Nazi Party was an extreme nationalist, racist, and anti-Semitic party. Once they came into power, the Nazis immediately began implementing anti-Jewish legislation to segregate the Jewish population. And eventually, propaganda was served to justify their deportation and elimination.
Through spreading his message of hatred against the Jews, Goebbels had directly witnessed the power of propaganda. In 1940, he released 2 anti-Semitic films to prepare the German public for the eradication of the Jews. The first, Der ewige Jude, The Eternal Jew, is a documentary that portrayed Jews as parasites on German society.
Wir erkennen, dass hier ein Pestherd liegt, der die Gesundheit der arischen Völker bedroht.
The metaphor of rats was used directly to provide justification for the final solution. Jews are represented as a destructive group that needed to be eliminated and eradicated in the interest of survival.
2 months earlier, Goebbels tried a different tact, using actors in a drama. JESUITS tells the story of a German village girl who is raped by an evil Jewish man. The film culminates with the villagers rising up to wreak vengeance on the man and expel all Jews. To Goebbels' disappointment, the documentary The Eternal Jew was a box office flop, but the movie JESUITS was a huge hit, seen by a staggering 20 million cinema-goers.
It conveyed a lot of the same messages that Der ewige Jude did, but it did so using entertainment. And this is something that I think the Nazis capitalized on. How you get across a propaganda message, perhaps in a subtle way, using entertainment.
From now on, the course was clear. Not documentaries, but Hollywood-style movies. Human dramas with the power to manipulate the emotions. To turn a Titanic story into a powerful drama, Selpin demanded and got his favorite screenwriter for the project, Walter Zerlett Olfenius. Selpin and Zerlett had been a winning team on the director's last 5 films. And as Selpin's recently discovered home movies reveal, Zerlett, here on the right, was also one of his oldest and most trusted friends. On the surface, they appeared to have little in common.
Selpin and Zerlett were rather considered as being an odd couple because Selpin was so an extroverted, attractive, athletic person, whereas Walter Zerlett Olfenius was a very skinny, always sick, very nervous person who smoked all the time, rather introverted, and he had some social problems to adjust. And Selpin was someone who helped him, I think, finding his way into society. They just grew together as a good companionship and as friends.
Selpin was delighted to have his old friend writing the script. But it was a decision that cost him his life. (1941), and Zerlett's script of the Nazi propaganda film Titanic got its approval from the Ministry of Propaganda. Selpin hired matinee idol Hans Nielsen, a star of the German silver screen, to play his leading man. There were, of course, no German officers on board the Titanic, so the Nazis simply invented one. Nielsen was to play First Officer Peterson, a man with an uncanny ability to see the future and a remarkably in-depth knowledge of icebergs.
Es gibt Eisberge, die einen Umfang von mehreren Kilometern haben und 7/8 eines solchen Berges liegen immer unter Wasser. Es besteht also die Gefahr, auf Unterwassereis aufzulaufen.
Gefahr für die Titanic? Ist ja lächerlich. Die Titanic ist unsinkbar.
Der Beweis ist noch nicht erbracht, Herr Präsident.
The end of the film leaves the viewer with no doubt that the German first officer is the hero.
Na, du hast mal keine Angst, meine Kleine, komm. Ich bring dich schon zu deiner Mutter.
By spring 1942, Selpin's shoot was well underway. But the complexion of the war had changed. Millions of Hitler's troops were now stationed deep into Russia stretching Nazi resources. And America had entered the war after Japan launched a surprise airstrike on Pearl Harbor. The Allies were taking on the Nazis in the propaganda war too, upping the stakes in the battle for hearts and minds. In 1942, they produced Casablanca, starring Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman as two lovers caught up in the Nazi occupation of North Africa. It's become a timeless classic, but it was conceived for a very specific propaganda purpose. Its release was brought forward to coincide with the big Allied offensive in North Africa.
Set in French Morocco at the beginning of the Second World War, Casablanca is the story of those desperate to escape the Nazi regime.
Casablanca is really a perfect example of a Hollywood propaganda film, as it makes effective use of major stars. But if you look at the story, it's a story frequently told in Hollywood anti-Nazi films, focusing on groups of people desperately trying to make it to America.
He's looking at you, kid.
America is the land of freedom, and so all their yearning is directed towards making that passage across the Atlantic.
In the same year, Britain also fired a salvo in the propaganda war, portraying Brits as a nation of survivors, ready to resist any Nazi invasion.
Defend us, thy humble servants, in all assaults of our enemies.
Went the Day Well was produced by Ealing Studios in 1942. It arose from a need to remind the British people that the danger of invasion had not passed. So the film dramatises a fictitious German invasion of England centred on a small rural village at Bramley End. And a company of, apparently of Royal Engineers arrived, but they turn out to be the advanced troops of the German invasion. They're eventually defeated when the villagers come together, people from all backgrounds, retaliate and fight back really quite brutally against the German invaders.
Ever fired a rifle, either of you?
Only a shotgun.
This was the battle the Nazi Titanic had to enter and win. The pressure on Selpine was mounting. April 1942, and he was halfway through his 6-month schedule. Now he faced the production's most technically challenging phase, filming the Titanic's sinking. He had ordered the construction of a 20-foot replica of the ship. German cinema was at the forefront of this technology. Their models were among the most advanced in the world. Selpine sent his art director, Fritz Maurischat, to oversee the shoot at Scharmützelsee, a huge lake east of Berlin. Models are usually shot inside a studio under controlled conditions, but there were no water tanks big enough to float Selpine's Titanic. The director's ambition was starting to look dangerous.
They had to build a huge slipway outside the lake to sink the Titanic, to pull it down by cable drums with the help of divers. To bring all the equipment to the lakeside, they needed about 25 trucks. It was really an immense logistical operation. But everything that could go wrong went wrong. We had fog, we had rain, we had storm.
To make matters worse, the model kept breaking down. Its electronics malfunctioned, so that it had to be sent back to Berlin for repair.
This would go on for weeks and weeks and months without sufficient footage.
Frustrated by the slow progress of the model shoot, Selpine began to set up shooting of the Titanic exteriors. He wanted it to be as authentic as possible.
Of course, they could have done the whole Titanic film inside the studio. But movie people, they always say, oh, we like to be authentic. It should be a realistic view, so we need a real ship.
Selpin demanded a ship big enough to double as the RMS Titanic. The Navy was engaged in war on several fronts, but still Goebbels forced them to provide one. The luxury liner Cap Arcona was serving as a floating barracks for the German Navy. Docked in the naval port of Gottenhafen, it was placed at Selpin's disposal. At the end of April 1942, Herbert Selpin headed east for Gottenhafen to film the all-important scenes of the sinking aboard the Cap Arcona. Trusted friend and screenwriter Walter Zahlet was already on location. He had been organizing extras from the German military and rehearsing the actors ready for the start of filming. The cameras were barely rolling when the problems resumed. Some of the officers playing the Titanic's crew were constantly drunk and kept disrupting filming.
There were people running around all the time, watching the shoot. There were noises from the harbor, like big ships, warships coming and going. So there was a constant scene of noise and interferences that made this shoot impossible.
And the actors kept forgetting their lines.
So he was fed up with it all in a way, and this emotion brought him to fall.
After a week's shooting, not one scene was in the can. Selpin called a crisis meeting at the hotel.
They got together for dinner, and during this occasion, he started to blame the German army and made fun about the Marines.
Selpin's grand plans had already pushed his friend's patience to the limit. Now he blamed Zerlett for failing to keep the naval officers in order. Zerlett responded that it was not his place to scold heroes of the Reich. Selpin's frustrations with the shoot boiled over. He shouted at Zerlett and loudly cursed the Navy, the Army, and even the Nazi war effort.
Walter Zerlett-Olfenius took military honor very seriously. He felt extremely offended.
Selpin's outburst would have been seen as high treason. Loose talk was dangerous, and the regime had spies everywhere.
The whole system was working on denunciation, the whole system in Nazi Germany. There were many people around quite willing to say, oh, this person said this, and that person said that, and that was it. But at that time, you could lose your life.
But the man who would denounce Selpin was Zerlett himself. The Titanic's secret production diary reveals that art director Maurice Schat pleaded with Zerlett not to denounce Selpin. But it was no use. Zerlett admitted, "I have become my best friend's gravedigger." Zerlett returned to Berlin and reported Selpin to the ministry. The director received a summons from Goebbels to attend Gestapo headquarters.
He was so shocked, and he was deeply afraid that he could lose his job and also lose his life by sentence once he would have been put to trial.
Goebbels was furious. Selpin had insulted the Nazi regime. and put a hugely important project in danger.
Goebbels, he asked him, did you say this? He said, yes, I have said, these are my remarks. I attacked the German army. I said this and that. And Goebbels asked him, and do you think this is true? And he said, yes. He was fully aware of what he said. He must have been fully aware about denunciation and things like that. So he knew he would face this situation. He was like a kamikaze. That was a kamikaze, and he crashed into his own Titanic.
Anne-Marie Graham was secretary to a highly placed member of Goebbels' ministry and the last person alive to remember the incident.
Ich sah, das Denunzieren, also das Anzeigen war ja so verbreitet. Das war ja das Schlimme. Sie mussten immer wissen, wem sagen sie das, ne? Dadurch ist ja so viel Unheil auch dann nachher passiert, Morde und sowas, nicht? Durch dieses Anzeigen. Der hat das gesagt und der hat so gesagt und na, wie es auch bei Serpin dann ist, nicht?
What happened next remains a mystery. When the guards opened Selpin's cell the following day, the director's dead body was found hanging from a water pipe, his braces round his neck.
There was some speculation, and for many years it was believed that Selpin was murdered.
Heißt es, wie ist er zu Tode gekommen? Das weiß keiner. Einer sagt, die Gestapo hat ihn da ermordet, anderer sagt, er hat Selbstmord begangen. Ja, man weiß es nicht.
Goebbels' private diary sticks to the official version of events.
Entry 1st August 1942. The director Selpin had committed suicide in his prison cell. This way, he came to the conclusion the court would have done.
Following Selpin's death, Goebbels hired a second director to finish the film, but he had bigger problems to worry about. December 1942. The tide of the war started to turn. Hitler's eastward advance ground to a halt at Stalingrad. The coldest Russian winter for a decade had decimated Nazi supply lines. German soldiers were dying in their thousands at the hands of the resurgent Red Army. Nightly bombing raids by Allied warplanes were having a devastating impact on German cities.
Und in der Zeit musste man sein Handgepäck oder was man da hatte, eben zusammenkramen und schnell in den Keller gehen. Aber viele Keller sind ja auch getroffen worden. Da sind die Bomben seitlich in die Fenster rein. Die gingen ja auch so. Und da sind natürlich auch viel verschüttet hier.
Goebbels finally sat down to watch his great blockbuster. But as the film rolled, an awful realization dawned on him. The scenes of the sinking bore an uncanny resemblance to what ordinary Germans were facing. He had made a terrible mistake.
Entry of 17th December 1942. Goebbels dictates, in the evening, Demandowski shows me and some of my guests his new film Titanic. I don't like the end, it needs to be changed completely.
Goebbels had produced a film more likely to demoralize than inspire a German audience.
When the movie was finished, the political circumstances had changed. Everybody was panicked. The daily air raids against Berlin and other German cities, taking shelter, all this reflected the situation on board of the Titanic. They couldn't use it because it would make people afraid. This is what Goebbels realized and said, we cannot screen this movie in Germany.
The progress of the war had changed the meaning of the film. The sinking ship now looked like a metaphor for Nazi decline. The propaganda minister had little choice. He banned his own film. But the story has a terrible postscript. A tragic event that resulted in the loss of over 10,000 lives. The Nazi forces' retreat proved as brutal as their advance, and one of their many atrocities gave a horrifying final twist to the story of the Nazi Titanic. January 1945, the Allies were advancing towards Berlin from the west, the Russians from the east. Head of the Gestapo, Heinrich Himmler, realizing that the war is lost, formed a horrifying plan. To erase the evidence of Nazi war crimes, they would kill all surviving inmates of concentration camps.
Himmler gave the order that no concentration camp inmate should be liberated and survive. They ordered death marches going from Neuengamme to Lübeck, going from Lübeck to Neustadt.
The SS marched thousands of inmates from camps inside occupied countries to the Baltic port of Neustadt. There they were ferried out to a gleaming passenger liner, the Cap Arcona, the ship that had been used as the Titanic in Selpin's film. One of the camp inmates was Henry Bavnik.
I saw this beautiful boat. We thought we were going on a cruise there.
In fact, Henry and the other 5,000 survivors had boarded a floating bomb. The SS had removed all the lifeboats, food, and drinking water from the ship, and had filled the fuel tanks full of gas and topped them with incendiary devices. The Arcona looked like a Nazi troop ship. The plan was to let Allied bombers eliminate these witnesses to Nazi war crimes.
It was clear that there would be an attack coming by the Allies. The ship was prepared by the Germans for a very fast sinking by an explosion.
Just minutes after Henry and the other camp survivors board the ship, they hear a terrifying sound, the drone of approaching RAF bombers.
All of a sudden, we see those planes coming, and we could hear that they dropped a bomb on the boat, but no big explosion or anything. But then we saw the fire started.
Also on board is Sam Pivnik.
We had machine gun and we had bombing, but none of us was military orientated. So we didn't know if it was the bombing or the machine guns, or both.
The RAF bombers had no idea there were prisoners on board. A bomb struck the Cap Arcona's stern and exploded, igniting the gas canisters.
I was on the other end of the boat, and also I was lucky that the wind was going toward where the bomb exploded. So we didn't feel much of the fire for a long time, you know. It took about 3-4 hours, and then I could see actually where the floor is starting to smoke.
The fire swept through the vessel. Soon the flames reached Sam on the top deck. He faced a choice: burn to death or risk a long drop into the freezing waters below.
Eventually, I was pushed near the edge of the top deck and I jumped into the water, hoping I can swim. I wasn't a good swimmer, but that's the only chance. You either bend or you swim.
As I watched down at the water, you could see how people, because a lot of people jumped into the water, you know. And I could see actually people go down for about 20, 30 feet. You could see how they all sinking. I mean, not doing anything, just slowly going down to the bottom.
If the icy waters and the flames weren't enough, RAF planes were strafing the fleet, and SS officers were picking off anyone trying to escape.
And they were shooting at us in the river, and the airplane was machine gunning us as well. It's like a fish in a barrel.
Suddenly, the Arkona listed dramatically, tipping more people into the sea. Only by grabbing hold of a rope did Henry manage to save himself from drowning.
And there I'm holding onto the rope, and there's about 300 people fighting to get to the rope. And within about 5 minutes, there were about 5, 6 guys that actually held onto the rope.
As the survivors tried to escape the freezing water, the SS were waiting.
As I come closer, there were police and SS shooting the people that came out of the water, and even shooting into the water. And I saw other people were ducking, and I did the same. So I still stayed in the water till it got a bit darker. And then I walked onto the land. But at that time, there was a lot of bodies lying around.
Back on the ship's burning hull, Henry was eventually rescued by a local fishing boat. He was one of the lucky few.
I must have had at least 50 friends that all died. That's only me, you know. 50 friends from the concentration camp that I was with them for practically 4 or 5 years.
Of the 5,000 who boarded the Cap Arkona, fewer than 350 survived. Its death toll was 3 times as many as the Titanic disaster. Just a few days later, the Nazis surrendered, ending the war in Europe. It was the terrible final act of the story of the Nazi Titanic. It wasn't until 1950 that the film was shown in Germany, with the propaganda element heavily censored. But it had a surprising afterlife. Some of the scenes shot for Nazi Titanic were recycled in the classic British film A Night to Remember. Salpine and Goebbels remain uncredited.
And the Revealed documentary series continues next week with a hot topic at the moment. Catch The Great Falklands, that's next Tuesday at 8. Stay put, next tonight, it's The Body of Proof season finale.
According to a recent poll taken in the United States,
Half of its population believed that the universe is inhabited by other intelligent life. The rest of the world cannot be far behind. The 1950s witnessed a sharp increase in the number of sightings all around the world, and with it, more and more evidence that something unusual was happening in our skies. Even the United States government took notice, beginning an official Air Force investigation called Project Blue Book. Their files soon overflowed with more than 12,000 sightings. These water beasts may well be the most ancient surviving inhabitants of our planet.
Did I see the monster? I don't know, but I do believe that, you know, I obviously saw some things, and nobody's been able to tell me what I saw. So I think I must have seen the monster.
Stonehenge. That place has become a metaphor for the magnificent, the unfathomable, and the mysterious.
I have the feeling that the people who built it had something very strongly in mind, maybe more than the astronomy and the worship. And I wish to goodness I knew what it was, and maybe I never will.
German scientist Werner von Braun is considered to be the architect of America's space program. Von Braun and his team took the technology from the German V-2 rocket, which had been created for destruction, and applied it to the development of the chariots that would take man to new worlds.
There's never been an astronaut who got on a spacecraft, whether it was Mercury, Apollo, or even Shuttle, who didn't fully understand the risk involved and who wasn't willing to take them.
The only voyage of the Titanic was surrounded by bad luck that defies belief. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It was as if she was cursed. A curse, some say, began when she was launched.
He went up and he came back. He said, it's nothing much, they only struck an iceberg.
This magnificent object is a symbol of genius, of ambition, and of dedication, for it is believed to have taken 30 years to construct. And that construction is not the least of its miracles.
It stands as, one of the most prominent monuments for its size and complexity, and also its lack of information about it. To be able to plan and economically accomplish such a large feat for the pharaoh is extraordinary.
This is the mark of Sasquatch, taken from a set of tracks that covered a 5-mile stretch of dense forest. The depth of each print indicates that whatever made it weighed 800 pounds. 800 pounds. And there's other, more dramatic evidence. On a hot afternoon in October, Roger Patterson and a friend were riding through some woods in northern California. Suddenly their horses shied. They looked ahead and saw something squatting by the creek. As the creature ambled away, Patterson took this film that has been analyzed, debated, and contested ever since. When she was born, she was never christened, never blessed.
To say a ship was unsinkable was flying in the face of God.
When she died, The world mourned her passing.
You can imagine what it was with these women who knew then that their husbands had gone down the ship.
She symbolized an era, and when she passed on, our world would never be the same. She was the Titanic.
Beyond what is known lies an unexplored world of shadows and phantoms. A land that knows no limits of time or space. From the dawn of discovery to the nightfall of catastrophe. Journey to a universe of the unexplained, the unforeseen, the unbelievable. A place where myth and legend are law, superstition a science. A place beyond reality, where no question will go unanswered.
Time for our journey to begin. The Titanic. We must find out what happened on that night so long ago. And this is our window into the past.
News of the world. Not just big, not just huge, why, it's Titanic. Yes, this week in Southampton, England, hurrahs greeted the new pride of the Atlantic, the White Star Line's brand new super ship, the Titanic. Under construction for the last 2 years, this great ship is filled with the best money can buy. And believe us, it bought a lot. Every stateroom is filled with the riches of old Europe, and the Titanic is justifiably called a floating palace. But you need to have the riches of a king to afford a deluxe ticket, because White Star owner Bruce Ismay expects and gets over $5,000 for a one-way ticket. But wait, what have we here? Why, getting on board in Queenstown, Ireland, it's a humble child of the sod, young Lily Goodwin. Oh, surely you aren't paying that king's ransom for a ticket. Yes, this young lass is going to America, too. Talk about the luck of the Irish. She and her 5 brothers and sisters can't wait to get aboard this super liner. A true Titanic of a ship. Bigger than the Washington Monument, but a lot more seaworthy. Bon voyage, Titanic. See you in New York.
If only Lily and her family had read this book, perhaps they would have reconsidered taking that voyage. Written 14 years earlier, this novel detailed with astonishing accuracy the maiden voyage of the Titan, a huge passenger liner that struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic, sinking with a great loss of life. In some ways, this prophecy turns the Titanic into a classic tragedy. But the end was ordained before the beginning. Designed to be the last word in luxury, the Titanic was incredible in every way. 880 feet from bow to stern. She left on her maiden voyage on the 10th of April, 1912, and there were many photographs taken upon her departure, including these unique glimpses of the doomed ship and passengers taken by a clergyman who disembarked at the ship's last stop in Ireland. Her captain, E.J. Smith, was considered the finest in all the Atlantic, and this was to have been his last voyage before retirement after an unblemished career. After leaving Ireland, 4 days passed uneventfully. Passengers relaxed and explored the brand new ship. Sunday the 14th was a day of rest, and even Captain Smith took the day off, foregoing his usual inspection of the ship. We know that the Titanic was told of ice ahead, and her wireless room reverberated with incoming warnings. But she ignored those messages and sped toward the ice field at full speed. The lookout cried out a warning, but it was too late. With a horrible grinding, the great ship struck the berg and immediately came to a silent stop. The Titanic had less than 2 hours to live. Captain Smith knew the unthinkable had occurred. His ship was doomed. It was time to abandon her, but with what? There were only enough lifeboats for 1/3 of her passengers, and Smith knew it. Women and children first was the cry, and slowly the evacuation began. The first and second classes were given priority on the lifeboats, and amazingly enough, many of the pitifully few boats left half empty. The end drew near. During this agonizing period, the Titanic frantically called for help. In vain. For even though the lights of 2 other nearby vessels were spotted, no rescue came. Many of the poor immigrants in 3rd class were trapped below, in some cases by gun-wielding crew members. And soon, everyone left on board knew the worst. The Titanic and all aboard her were doomed. The ship's band gathered together on the top deck and played ragtime dance tunes, and then as the water rushed to meet them, hymns. Finally, at 2:20 a.m., she stood on end and vanished. There were only 705 survivors. The events of that Sunday night have become legend. Now we must go back and walk the decks of the Titanic ourselves and meet the men and women who went with her into oblivion. The only voyage of the Titanic was surrounded by bad luck that defies belief. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. It was as if she was cursed. A curse some say began when she was launched, but not christened. It is now April 12th, 1912. The Titanic has less than 8 hours to live.
I must say, this voyage has exceeded all expectations. And if we keep up this speed, we'll be in New York by Wednesday. It almost seems a shame to arrive so soon.
What an exciting time we've had. If only my mum would join us. But she won't come out to the cabin. You see, there was folks who got bad feelings and left right before we sailed. Now, Mum's scared. She's thinking the ship could sink. This ship... I hear they have solid gold faucets above decks. Oh, I wish they'd let me just take one look.
If you ask me, this whole trip's been marked. They got a coal fire down below they can't put out. We nearly hit to New York when we left Hampton. Everything is new and not working proper. Oh, yeah, and this is perfect. They didn't give me no binoculars. None of the lookouts have them. Imagine that. What do they want me to do up there? Sleep.
The Titanic hit the iceberg at a speed in excess of 22 knots, and even the angle of collision was unlucky. Had she turned 10 seconds earlier, she would have missed the iceberg entirely. Had she turned 10 seconds later, she would have collided dead-on, a survivable catastrophe. But she struck in the worst imaginable fashion, in such a way that 6 bulkheads burst, dooming 1,500 innocent people.
I warned them. Just as soon as I seen it, I swear I did. But there was no waves, so the berg had no waterline. And it must have just turned over because it was dark blue. And there weren't no moon. Everything was pitch black. Nobody could have seen it in time. Nobody.
The
Well, of course I didn't get into the lifeboat ahead of any women and children. Everything was moving as smoothly as could be expected. Why, Wallace and his band were playing, keeping spirits high and dry. Everybody waited their turn. There was absolutely no panic.
We saw the lifeboats going down into the water, and they won't tell us why. And they won't let us upstairs. Dad and Mikey went to go see what they could do, but they haven't come back yet. Should we keep waiting? We don't know what to do.
It was horrible. Bloody awful. This one gent jumped off the bridge and landed smack on some deck chairs. Poor blighter never had a chance. She was all lit up, and even though our boat had moved some distance away, she was magnificent. You could see the light still on underwater.
There was water. Freezing water up to our ankles. I tried to climb upstairs, but then the water came spilling down. It was coming at us from above and below.
She pointed straight up in the air. The boilers came loose with a terrible roar. Me, I was in boat 6. And all around us in the water. I never heard such awful sounds. Screams, prayers, and choking. It took a long time for some of them to be still.
I don't remember much else, really. It just got so cold. So cold.
Lily Goodwin and 1,522 others perished that night, and a few wished they had. Bruce Ismay died in disgrace 25 years later under a cloud of suspicion, because he had lived while so many had died. Frederick Fleet took his own life almost 50 years later, perhaps the last victim of that April night. But some did live. A handful of those survivors are alive today, and they remember what it was like on that terrible night. They were little girls then. They were on the Titanic that night, and they lived to remember.
Well, my mother had a premonition, and she never went to bed in that ship at night at all. She sat up every night.
And he says, Madam, you don't have to be afraid of anything. He says, you know that the Titanic has watertight compartments.
And the only thing that she felt strongly about was that she said that to say that the ship was unsinkable, which indeed was what was claimed, to say a ship was unsinkable was flying in the face of God.
The Titanic was going very fast, and the vibration was terrible. What woke us up was the stopping of the ship.
And my mother didn't say, well, I told you something was going to happen. She said nothing at all. She just stood there.
He went up and he came back. He said, it's nothing much. They only struck an iceberg. I think I probably was the last one to get in because they lowered the boat right away.
And so as they proceeded to lower the lifeboat, my father put my mother and I in and made absolutely no attempt to get in himself.
After we got in the lifeboat, he says, I'll see you in New York. Never saw him again. He went down with the boat.
I'll never forget the terrible noise that ship made when it was drawn down. Human beings screaming And the rush of water, it was terrible.
The sounds of people drowning are something that I cannot describe to you, and neither can anyone else. It's the most dreadful sound. And there's a terrible silence that follows it. When the ship was no longer there, and the lights had all gone, and the dark night was round us, and all these dreadful noises had gone, I was only 7, but I remember thinking that everything in the world was standing still.
The Titanic still exists. In some ways, her story has not yet ended. Let's journey to her final resting place, 12,000 feet below the North Atlantic. It is strangely peaceful where she lies. A rust-encrusted tomb that remained hidden until its discovery in the fall of 1985 in an expedition led by a scientist named Robert Ballard.
All throughout the Titanic expedition, there were 2 individuals. There was the professional and there was the human. And in most cases, the professional was very busy and the human just had to sit and wait. But then there were moments, seeing it for the first time through the porthole of the submarine, or landing on the deck for the first time, or all the different firsts that happened. The human would come through whenever you gave it a chance. And certain images, empty lifeboat davit, the doll's head, chandelier, going down the grand staircase, that was my dream. That was my focus for so many years, that I wanted to go inside. I not only wanted to find the Titanic, but I always wanted to go inside of it. And the landing Alvin on the entrance to the grand staircase above the elevator shaft, and then sending JJ down deep inside, and then moving into that room and then spotting that chandelier, that was the culmination of, if there was any one thing I did, that really was what it was all about.
The Titanic has inspired men and women who today keep her memory alive. Men and women who gather together to celebrate her life and commemorate her death. The Titanic has captured the imagination of the world. In 1912, this sinking was one of the first media events, and anyone connected with the tragedy was newsworthy. Today, little has changed, and Titanic survivors and people fascinated with the subject gather together at conventions like this.
I think the basic story of the Titanic itself is inherently fascinating. It reads like a Greek drama. The Titanic's passengers are themselves a very interesting group of people. We have everything from 11 millionaires to the humblest immigrant. And within that range of people, you have very often someone that you particularly relate to, and you tend to see the disaster through these people's eyes. What is essentially going on here at our convention is a sharing of information. Titanic Society members, each of them do individual research, and both through the Society's journal and also through meetings such as this, they can share the results of their research with one another.
Pieces of this great ship can be found inside maritime museums. Artifacts that remind us of what life was like on her one and only voyage. When the great ship went down, the North Atlantic was covered in debris, and some was picked up. Other, more personal items were taken from the ship by passengers who disembarked before she left Ireland, or taken from the White Star offices in London. Now on display, you can find everything from surviving deck chairs to Mrs. Astor's life jacket to an actual piece of the Titanic's plush carpeting taken as a memento by one of the men who installed it. In one such museum, located below decks on the Queen Mary in Long Beach, California, this huge model of the Titanic can be found as if headed towards its fatal rendezvous. The memory of this great ship and the men and women who walked upon her decks will surely live on for as long as we travel the oceans. The Titanic was overwhelmed by her tragic destiny and a few seconds of disastrous luck. Titanic, may she rest in peace.
Secrets and Mysteries presents information based in part on theories and opinions, some of which are controversial. The producer's purpose is not to validate any side of an issue, but through the use of actualities and dramatic recreation, relate a possible answer, but not the only answer, to this material.
I'm sure many are aware of this latest news story with the Titan. Very interesting. They select this name Titan to go visit the Titanic. Let's get right to it with TMZ's reporting, and I'll break it all down.
Hey everybody, so rescue crews are desperately trying to find the submarine with 5 passengers on board that was supposed to explore the Titanic wreckage. Want to break down everything we know so far. So on Sunday, this thing called the Titan took off in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and about 2 hours into the trip is when the main vessel lost communication with the Titan. So among the 5 people on board is British billionaire Hamish Harding.
And I'll stop right there. With Hamish Harding, you get your HH. They love the duality names. H is, of course, the 8th letter of the alphabet. It's in plain sight. Let's continue.
Harding's definitely a well-known explorer. He actually also went up into space on one of the Jeff Bezos missions.
That tells you a lot right there as well. Suppose they're going to space with Jeff Bezos.
We should note Hamish's stepson, Brian, actually posted to Facebook and was one of the first people to confirm that he was on the submarine that was missing. And puzzling to some people, just a few minutes after he announced that his stepdad was missing, he said that he was at a Blink-182 concert in San Diego. Now, obviously, Brian knew that he might get some heat for this, so he said, look, you may think that this is weird that I'm at this concert, but I love music and music is healing for me.
And really important to stop right there. This is basically free advertisement for Blink-182. And here's the lead singer, Tom DeLonge, and you see the Masonic square and compass all over the neck of the guitar. And again, this is basically the Masonic Brotherhood being displayed everywhere with this news story. The billionaire, Jeff Bezos, and you see the Masonic, again, square and compass. So this is, again, like I stated many times, they always have their Masonic fingerprints in these news stories. Are Masons. They're not going to have non-Masons part of these news stories, obviously. Let's continue on here.
Now, as for the Titan itself, it's only 21 feet long. 5 passengers can go on it. And in a news piece that was done before this incident happened, you kind of saw the controls of this thing, and a lot of the parts were store-bought. They showed off a light that appeared to come from some sort of RV store, and the controller itself kind of looked like a Nintendo or a video game controller.
So you're going to have a billionaire aboard this submarine go down, and they're going to control this submarine with a Nintendo controller, and the facepalm tells you it all. And of course, you see the symbolism as well here. Let's continue.
To kind of navigate this thing and maneuver it. As I said, the search mission is getting really desperate with only about 35 hours left of emergency oxygen left in the vessel for those 5 on board, if they are even alive. We don't know if there was a power issue, if there's a pressure issue, or kind of what led to the loss of communication with the main ship. We also now know that the U.S. Navy is involved, and they have sent a deepwater lifting system to the area where they believe this thing could be in the event they find it and can try and pull it up from the ocean.
And again, it's called the Titan. With this whole entire news story and how it all works out is by design, without a shadow of a doubt. Where the story of the Titanic is based off the book, The Wreck of the Titan or Futility by Morgan Robertson. Let's take a look here and compare the fictional book to what supposedly took place back in 1912 with the Titanic. So the fictional book compared to the so-called actual events 14 years later, where in the book you had the largest craft afloat, the largest luxury liner, and both were unsinkable. Crashed 400 miles from Newfoundland. The same thing with the Titanic. Crashed at 25 knots. Very similar at 22.5 knots. Hit an iceberg on the starboard bow. Hit an iceberg on the starboard bow. So these are identical, of course. Not enough lifeboats for the passengers in the book. Not enough lifeboats for the passengers, of course, with the Titanic. More than half the passengers passed. Same thing with the Titanic. Sank in April. Same thing with the Titanic. Sank in the North Atlantic. Obviously the same with the Titanic. Sank near midnight. Identical. British-owned steel vessel. Same thing here in both. Very similar in length. 800 feet long compared to 882 feet long. 2,500 passengers compared to 2,200 passengers. So you see, basically what it comes down to, the Titan was predicted programming for the Titanic. The movie directed by James Cameron, as you see here with the orange ladder. Orange is 33 numerology. And of course the ladder symbolism, as I pointed out many times in the past, all to do with moving up, ascension, as you see here, and of course the black and white checkerboard. And like I mentioned earlier with the whole entire story of the Titan, son visiting the Blink-182 concert, all the Masonic fingerprints all over the place as usual. And again, this is huge with the submarine being called the Titan. I can't emphasize that enough, how this all comes together. Taking a look at Hollywood movie director James Cameron and Bob Ballard, the man that supposedly discovered the Titanic at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean back in 1985, side by side during this ABC News interview regarding the OceanGate Titan submarine. Let's take a listen here, and as always with these news stories, they're Masonically coded. Let's take a listen.
Person closely familiar with the Titanic is director James Cameron, along with his Oscar-winning movie, of course. He's actually made 33 dives to the wreckage site itself. James and Robert, thank you both so much for...
So 33 dives to see the Titanic. Not 32, not 34. It has to be 33 times he visited the Titanic. I mentioned this before. I showed this before with James Cameron in the orange ladder. All to do with Freemasonry. Like I demonstrated before, take a look here at the ascension with the ladder. And James Cameron himself, with Cameron being a 33 name. So again, all these news stories with the Masonic fingerprints. And more of the same here with James Cameron with this Viking type helmet with the horns. And the obvious black and white symbolism when it comes to Freemasonry, once again with the checkerboard. Also, take a look here at this U.S. Coast Guard representative, Frederick, doing the Masonic hand sign. And all these high-level people in society, they're all Masons without a shadow of a doubt. And that gets into this individual here. His name is Jake. He has his own channel on YouTube. Nearly 14 million subscribers. Take a listen to what he says here. This is just 3 weeks prior, in his own words, with the trial run with the Titan, supposedly making his journey to the Titanic. Let's take a listen to what he has to say here in his own words.
The whole world watching the rescue efforts of the missing submarine around the Titanic, I thought I'd share my experience of Mission 3 just a few weeks ago, and if my dive wasn't canceled, it could have been me inside that submarine today. The Titanic, super pretty. The artist did an amazing job, but I'm excited to toss it in the water. You ready to go?
So this ceremony with the reef being tossed in the ocean, part of the production getting ready for what took place, obviously, just a few days ago. Pre-production, no doubt about it. Let's take a look here at more of this.
I'm gonna pass it over.
Okay. Yeah.
Hey, will someone grab that?
Should be good.
Thank you, bud. Oh, that's
Hold it. Hold.
Oh, shit,
hold.
sorry about
Wait. It'll come for you. Yep. There you go.
Hey!
Yay!
As he makes his way towards the Titan, as you see here, take a listen to the words he says here as the Titan submerges.
So we're officially underwater in a submarine right now. 33 feet, I believe, right?
33 feet. As always, again, coated. And like I said earlier, this was just 3 weeks prior to the supposed Titan visiting the Titanic during that tour with the 5 individuals. And let's take another listen when he mentions the 33 feet once again. And someone in the background, they want to really emphasize that 33 by repeating the number 33 for your dual 33s. Take a listen.
33 feet, I believe, right? 10 meters. Yeah.
33 feet.
So again, they really have to emphasize the 33. Not only that, the dual 33. Just like you see here with this Grand Sovereign Commander Luther Smith and the dual 33s, which I've shown many times in the past, and the dual-headed Eagle or Phoenix in plain sight. Now, one thing that's really flown under the radar is this one talk TV show based in the BBC. And to me, this is play mockery, where you have this individual call in this talk show, and his name is Colin, calling into this call-in talk show. Let's take a listen here and look at the woman's hand sign. 100%. You're not going to make it big. You're not going to make it on TV unless you're part of the club. Let's get right to it.
Colin is in Bergen in Norway. And Colin, you actually work as a remote vehicle operator for subs yourself, don't you?
That's correct, Julia. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Do you know what? When I said, look, call in if you happen to know when you're an expert in this field, I kind of said it tongue in cheek.
And obviously, like I said, she's referring to Colin, who called in. Give me a break.
Absolutely incredible for you to get in touch. What do you make of the chances of A, finding this sub, and B, getting these men out alive?
Okay, well, there's some big holes in this story because a little bit of background. If you work, I know I work in the oil and gas industry, and we send ROVs down from boats all the time, down to about 3,000 meters too. We always have at least 1 or 2 transponders on them, which is basically a little signaling device which pings the signal back to the surface for the boat to pick up so they can identify where you are and your water depth.
Yeah.
And these things, they're actually, you can hire them or buy them. And they're straight off the shelf. There's companies all over the world rent or sell these things. And they're very accessible. They're not that expensive. So from the life of me, I cannot understand how this sub has gone down there without a few of those attached.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, exactly. That's because look, we spoke to experts, former Navy commanders who are saying, look, they wouldn't dream of getting into this sort of this tin can effect to be operated by a PlayStation module.
They're talking about the Titan being nothing more than a tin can and being controlled by the PlayStation controller. But the big thing is they're adding this controversy with Colin calling in, stating why don't they use a transponder. There's some discussion about this online, and some say they used a transponder, some say they didn't. It doesn't make sense how it would go out because basically the transponder doesn't work off the power from anything within. It works autonomously by itself without the use of any external power. And like Colin stated, it doesn't make sense why they wouldn't use that to track the Titan, which they had trouble finding. Obviously, with this story, if it was able to be tracked, it could have saved the people's lives aboard. We know this is all part of the story, and they want to distract society And people might ask, why would they do this? Why would they have this story out there? It's the matrix we're living in. You know, they're controlling this matrix. They're controlling this reality with all these news stories. Let's continue on here.
There's some holes in this.
He doesn't make sense to you. In from Bergen in Norway, he's a remote-operated vehicle pilot who controls remote-operated vehicles on the sea floor. And he's called in. I did actually ask, didn't I, Colin? Oh, get in touch if you happen to be an expert in rescuing submarines. And amazingly, you were listening and you have called in. Colin, thanks.
Just amazing. This guy's calling in, like she said. Amazing.
For staying on the line. Look, you were saying that there's some holes in this. The key thing for you is that why they have lost contact with this submersible that disappeared early on Sunday morning, just an hour and 45 minutes after going down at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning. Because you're saying, look, there should be, it's just routine, it's very cheap, it's very reliable, this sort of sonar pinger, and it shouldn't be affected by a power loss inside the sub.
Absolutely not. The whole idea is these things are they're little round tubes about twice the size of a milk bottle, and they just strap onto the outside, and they're bulletproof, so they can send a signal. They last up to a week, so they should have had some of those on board. They really should.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, and this, yeah, it is very strange, isn't it? Now, look, we know there are 5 men on board. One of them is the teenage son of one of the other men on board. I mean, Hamish Harding is an explorer. We've got a Pakistani businessman, Shahzada Dawood, and his son Suleiman, teenager. Also, the CEO of OceanGate. They're the people who run the company that it provides this mission. That's Stockton Rush. Also, a 73-year-old French explorer, Paul-Henri Nargelet, believed to be the man piloting this mission. You know, they paid $250,000 for this. This is a sort of the ultimate tourism, other than going into outer space.
And it's very interesting. She mentions tourism to the Titanic, comparing it to outer space. How can they communicate with no issues? 238,000 miles away, supposedly, according to science, with the distance of the moon, and underneath the ocean, 2.5 miles down, and they can't communicate. Nothing about this story makes sense. Even this man who called in, even states there's a lot of holes in this story. None of it makes sense.